Trump accuses Russia of helping North Korea.
Apple has a big check for Uncle Sam.
Why cybersecurity startups are failing to cash in on all these cyber attacks.
This is Reuters Now.
President Donald Trump on Wednesday accused Russia of helping North Korea evade economic sanctions as China has withdrawn its aid. In an interview with Reuters at the White House, Trump said Russia is, quote, not helping us at all with North Korea. But Trump praised the actions of Chinese President Xi Jinping, saying Beijing is doing a lot to help rein in Pyongyang. Reporter Steve Holland was in the Oval Office with Trump for the interview.
He said the problem is that Russia is filling in the gaps. They're coming in, sending fuel to North Korea to help them. We have not had the president saying this directly in a public way. So this is a new development. Russia denies this, but the president said this is a big problem, and the United States doesn't have a great relationship with Moscow, so it's not able to sort of figure this issue out at the moment.
He added that China could do more to help. The president said the United States needs to add to its missile defense systems because North Korea is getting closer to being able to launch a strike.
They're not there yet, he said, but they're getting closer every day.
Trump has said recently that he would be willing to speak with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but he told Reuters he was not sure it would lead to anything meaningful.
In the past, the president has welcomed the opportunity, said he might be willing to have talks directly with Kim, but today he wondered whether it would really be anything good would come of it.
Apple about to write a $38 billion check to Uncle Sam. I'm Stephen Nellis with Reuters News in San Francisco. You might not know it, but Apple has amassed about $250 billion in cash in overseas accounts thanks to profitable products like the iPhone. But it hasn't brought that cash back to the United States because it would have faced a big tax bill. The GOP tax plan passed last month brought that rate way down. Apple is going to pay a one-time tax of $38 billion and then be able to basically bring that money back as it pleases. On Wednesday, Apple said that it plans to spend about $30 billion in the U.S. to build data centers and a new U.S. campus in addition to its headquarters in Cupertino. Apple hasn't said where that campus will be yet, but it said that it plans to create about 20,000 jobs directly in the United States over the next 5 years.
Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan has been warning of an attack, an imminent possible attack by Turkish forces against a Kurdish enclave of Afrin here down on the Turkish border with Syria. I'm Dominic Evans, Reuters Bureau Chief in Turkey. Turkey is looking at launching an operation against a Kurdish enclave, the Afrin enclave, over my shoulder behind me. There have been artillery attacks, howitzer launches for several days. President Tayyip Erdogan has said that a military operation could take place at any time. Afrin is one area that is controlled by the Kurds in Syria. It's actually a relatively small pocket. To the east of here is a much larger Kurdish area that is controlled by Kurdish fighters supported by the United States who carried out the brunt of the fighting against Islamic State.
The Trump administration's decision to drastically cut aid to Palestinian refugees could put a humanitarian crisis on Israel's doorstep. The U.S. will provide less than half of its normal funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, holding back $65 million. A move that the UN says will hit food, healthcare, and education for over 1 million people in Gaza alone. Dan Williams is in the Reuters Jerusalem Bureau.
The Trump administration's demand that UNRWA undergo a review, possibly a redefinition, is not new. It's basically a dedicated refugee agency for one refugee community, the Palestine Arab refugees of the 1948 war, in which Israel was created. The mechanism has evolved in a way that the refugee status as defined by UNRWA for Palestinian refugees is generational. It extends to the descendants. Well, this is something Israel and it appears U.S. officials now say it's hard to justify, especially when it comes to US outlay in terms of finance.
There's also allegations levied by Israel that UNRWA is a source of employment for militant elements. They say its duties should be folded into the UN's larger global refugee program. But violence has seethed since Trump's declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital back in December. His former pledge of bringing peace to the region now appears to be out the window.
We've been noticing a bit of nuance on the Israeli side. The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, appears to be somewhat hesitant. The Israeli misgivings appear to be linked to a recognition that, whether they like it or not, UNRWA sustains much of life in the Gaza Strip. Were it to lose its funding overnight, essentially you would have large numbers of people in that already impoverished enclave teetering into outright humanitarian crisis, which in turn could lap up against Israel's borders. Gaza is a very small place.
A U.S. official told Reuters that some of Trump's aides originally demanded cutting all funding, but opposing voices said it was too risky.
Donald Trump drew accusations of racism and sparked outrage among Haitians after he reportedly questioned why the U.S. should take immigrants from that country and African nations, referring to them as, quote, shithole countries. Trump denied using the term, but on Wednesday, his administration announced Haitians would no longer be eligible for U.S. work visas given to unskilled laborers. Haitians had been able to apply for the H-2A visa for agricultural work and the H-2B visa for non-agricultural labor following that nation's devastating earthquake. The Department of Homeland Security announced Haitians would no longer be eligible, but the move may be largely symbolic because the number of visas issued to Haitians through the program was very, very small. Just 65 Haitians entered the U.S. on H-2A visas in 2016, according to government data. Another 54 were granted visas by the State Department between March and November last year. The number of Haitians granted H-2B visas in 2016 was greater than zero, but too low to report, according to the Department of Homeland Security. DHS cited, quote, fraud and abuse of the visa programs as reasons for stripping Haiti from the list of eligible countries. Supporters of the visas said they gave Haitians a rare opportunity to work legally in the United States, contribute to the U.S. economy, and help fund the recovery of Haiti after the earthquake, which killed more than 200,000 people.
As world leaders head to the serene, snow-covered mountains of Davos, Switzerland, the risk of outright war has risen sharply. That's according to a survey released Wednesday by the World Economic Forum, which hosts the annual gathering in Davos, with more than 90% of nearly 1,000 experts from government, business, and academia predicting a worsening of geopolitical confrontations between major powers this year. Nuclear war, cyber attacks, and natural disasters topped the list of the 2018 Global Risks Report, but nuclear conflict climbed higher up the list of concerns after a year of escalating rhetoric between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. 79% of those polled see a heightened risk of state-on-state military conflict, citing a rise in, quote, charismatic strongman politics across the world. And in addition to the threat of war on the Korean Peninsula, the report pointed to the risk of new military confrontations in the Middle East. Trump is due to give a speech on the closing day of the World Economic Forum next Friday. The survey comes as Trump considers approving a newly drafted nuclear strategy that would explicitly leave open the possibility of nuclear retaliation for non-nuclear attacks on American infrastructure, including crippling cyber attacks.
In a rare agreement, North and South Korea will be joining forces at next month's Winter Olympics, forming a combined women's ice hockey team and marching together during the opening ceremony. The nations will appear with a unified peninsula flag, according to a joint statement released on Wednesday. South Korea is hosting the Games in Pyeongchang this year. But earlier suggestions of a hockey tie-up got an icy reception among some athletes in the South. The two sides have been fierce rivals in the past. Before the decision was confirmed, one official said that team members found it, quote, absurd that they would have to play with complete strangers. Both sides will now need to thrash out the logistics in a rare show of inter-Korean unity. North Korea is sending a 550-strong delegation to its southern neighbour. With the Olympics just 3 weeks away, there'll be a lot to work out.
And if North Korea does not choose the pathway of engagement, they themselves will trigger an option.
That option may be a military response. It's a strong message from U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to Pyongyang on Tuesday at a meeting in Vancouver where 20 nations gathered to talk about the regime's weapons program. Members at the one-day meeting, co-hosted by the U.S. and Canada, say the world needs to enforce tougher sanctions against the North, especially China and Russia. Both of those nations weren't actually at the meeting, and diplomats say any agreements made in Vancouver are limited at best. It also comes as the two Koreas sit down for their first talks after 2 years of soaring tensions. But across the globe in Canada, warnings the world shouldn't be fooled by Pyongyang playing nice.
It is not the time to ease pressure or to reward North Korea.
The majority of nations in Vancouver supported South Korea during the Korean War, and the North's allies, China and Russia, have slammed the meeting, calling it an example of what they say is Cold War-era thinking. On Tuesday, Tillerson again rejected China's calls to freeze joint military exercises with the South, and the day's talks focused on forcing Pyongyang into a diplomatic solution.
And we have sent clear messages to North Korea that we are ready for serious negotiations. North Koreans know our...
With all the cyber attacks happening around the world to all sorts of companies, you'd think that cybersecurity would be a hot space to invest in, but it's not. I'm Leanna Baker with Reuters in New York. Cybersecurity is such a cutting-edge, fast-moving space that by the time a lot of these private startups come out with their technology, it's already obsolete and hackers have figured out how to infiltrate that technology. That's one reason why it's hard for these companies that are hot when they raise money to successfully sustain that momentum for several years. Another reason is that big corporations are trying to cut down on the amount of security vendors that they use. They'd rather just use a big provider like Symantec or IBM that provides a whole bunch of services rather than spread their business around to all these new startups coming out with technology. Microsoft, Cisco, and Symantec have been good at catching up, coming out with their own versions of very similar technology, even within a few years. This has crowded out a lot of these smaller upstarts that while they have a lot of VC funding, they found it very hard to sustain their valuations over time. This provides little windfall for investors. About 300 cybersecurity companies are founded every year, and there's about 2,500 companies already out there. One expert I spoke to compared these companies to cockroaches. They're not going to die, but they're not smoking hot either.
Bitcoin slammed for a second straight day, its value almost splitting in half from its peak price. The cryptocurrency dropped 12% on Wednesday, as investors feared regulators could clamp down on trading, pushing the price of Bitcoin down below $10,000 on the Bitstamp exchange, the lowest since December 1st. Other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and Ripple sinking as well after reports South Korea and China could ban cryptocurrency trading. Japan is also considering regulation, and officials in France and the United States have vowed to further investigate cryptocurrencies.
Vinalon Man. He's a superhero named after a synthetic fabric, which Pyongyang hailed as a miracle fibre. In this 70s propaganda cartoon, Vinalon Man beats nylon and is crowned king of fibres. That may sound bizarre, but it's a homage to a fabric that symbolised the country's dream of self-reliance, as Reuters' James Pearson explains.
Well, that propaganda cartoon came out at the kind of peak of the miracle that was Vinalon. You know, the North State had found out a way to turn stone into fabric, and they were educating kids